We're continuing in the life of Paul. We are in the middle of what is known as the Euroclydon. It's this terrible storm that can be expected in the Mediterranean at this particular time of year. And we are at anywhere from early to mid-October is where we are in this. And we can know this. In 2 weeks maybe ago, we were talking about that of Paul talking when they were at Fair Havens, talking about that the fast was over. And that's his way of noting specific times of year. Not that he kept that, but noting set times of the year. And so we know about when that was. That's when they were in Fair Havens, and that would be late September to early October. Now we are 2 weeks out of Fair Havens, and they have been caught from the first day they left Fair Havens, which is on the Isle of Crete. They got caught in a terrible storm that will last, well, I don't know how long it'll last, but they'll be caught in it for 2 weeks, and where they will make landfall. And they will run aground because that's the only way they could be saved. And that's precisely what Christ, or actually an angel, tells Paul would happen. Now, we're in Acts chapter 27. We want to begin in verse 33. Now, just to bring us up to a little bit of speed, Paul has told them what the angel told him, that no one will die, no harm will come to them, that they're going to run aground, and on a certain island they're going to run aground, and everything Paul tells them comes true. Everything he says comes true. Now, at about midnight, the sailors here, they can sense they're close to land. They can sense it. It's midnight. They can't see it. They sense it. They can hear a shoreline is what they can hear, because that's going to sound different than just being in the open ocean. It's going to sound different. Water hitting land, hitting rocks perhaps. And so they do take soundings, and they put down 4 anchors, so they can kind of stay put where they are. And they do need to stay put until they get some light to know what they're dealing with. Okay, now we will go to verse 33. And as day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food, saying, "Today is the 14th day you have waited and continued without food and eating nothing." This is how bad the storm was. Now, I've never been on a ship where there was a terrible storm. Never. And certainly not in a ship like this. But I did have a friend years ago who worked on, it was a boat that went from Florida, I think, to South America. He worked on that ship. And he said one time there was a terrible storm they went through, and he said for about 48 hours they did nothing but work to save the ship, and they ate nothing. Because not only could you not cook anything, you don't feel like eating at all. And so they've not eaten anything. There are things to eat on this ship, but they've eaten nothing. Now, verse 34, "Therefore I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you." So here is the assurance. Eat. This is for your survival. You need the strength to make it to shore. This is for your survival. You haven't eaten anything now for 2 weeks. Eat something. And then he is going to do that. Verse 35, "And when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then they were all encouraged and also took food themselves." So this was this was an encouragement to them. This was encouraging. He gave them these words of assurances that not a hair is going to fall off of your head, meaning nobody's going to be harmed. You're not going to drown. You're not going to be bruised. You're not going to be cut. You're going to get wet, obviously, but there'll be no harm to anyone from what's about to happen. But take nourishment. He prays before them all. Then he begins to eat, and so they do too. They took food for themselves. Verse 37. And in all, and here we get the number who's on the ship. And in all, we were 276 persons on the ship. So there's a lot of people on the ship. 276 people are here on this ship. And he's talking to all of them, and they've all been in this. They have been pushed and shoved and battered westward for the past 2 weeks. They've been without sails. On day one, they took the sails down. They took care of that then. They struck sail on day one. And since then, they've just been driven by the weather and where the water's pushing them. And it is pushing them due west. And for 2 weeks, this has been occurring. And it's been just a continual storm where they cannot manage to escape. They don't even know where they are because they can't navigate. It doesn't say so here, but we're going to find that, it's raining. And so most of the time they would be in shelter in this ship. Now, when they had eaten enough, verse 38, they lightened the ship and threw out the wheat into the sea. So this is the cargo. And this is where most of the weight of the ship would be in the cargo of it. And so they've come to this point of where we can't save anything now. This voyage is going to come to an end, and will have no profit. It's going to be lost. Exactly as Paul told them that he perceived it when they were at Fair Havens. They were safe at harbor in Fair Havens. They didn't want to stay there. He told them that he perceived there was going to be loss of the ship and of the cargo, and maybe even of lives. Now, he's not saying that then. He's not saying it by inspiration, because he's going to be told what's going to happen, and then he tells them specifically what they must do. He tells them specifically what they must do. And in everything that he has said has proven to be right. And so as this time progresses, you have the centurion, at least Julius, who's trusting him more and more. And I think others are trusting him more and more. Okay, so they have to throw the wheat out into the sea. Now, verse 39. When it was day, they did not recognize the land. So when it was day, now they could see what they're close to. And they don't know where it is. Now, he told them they were going to a certain island. So they could know that. He tells them that in verse 26, that he was told, however, we must run aground on a certain island. So, all right, here it is. It's day. Now they can see. Now here's a land, but they observed a bay with a beach onto which they plan to run the ship if possible. And that is if possible. Because the world is contrary at the moment. That is, the weather, the sea, the wind, the rain, everything has been contrary to any kind of control they've wanted to have on the ship. They've had no control. If you recall, all they were hoping to do, or I should say, if worse came to worse, when they left Fair Havens, was we can always go to Phoenix, which was also on the southern coast of Crete, only 45 miles away. So if things get bad, we'll just go to Phoenix. That's a better place than where we are in Fair Havens. But it got bad. and they couldn't make it to land. The storm was so terrible, they couldn't do it. And the ship has been caught until now. All right? And their plan is to run it aground. That's the best they can do. So here we have a bay. It's got a beach. This is where we're going to do. And this is what they do. And they let go the anchors and left them in the sea. So they're not lifting up the anchors. They just cut them. They cut the rope. There's no reason to have the anchors because they're not going to have the ship for very long. The anchors evidently have done their job through the night well enough. They weren't pushed onto land yet. And so they cut the anchors. Meanwhile, loosing the rudder ropes. All right? What is that all about? Okay. They've had no sails. The rudder actually would be useless because they're not using their sails to be pushed along. They're being pushed along by waves and just being battered one direction and another. And they've been battered due west from where they were. And there's no point to using the rudder at all. So what's with the rudder ropes? Why did they loose the rudder ropes? Well, those ropes would have been there to keep the rudder in place. Why? Because the rudder, if it's allowed to just be battered and it's loose to move however it wants, it could very well break, or it could also damage the ship. So they bind it, they put a rope on it to keep it from doing that. Now, it still may break by pressures from the water. There's nothing they can do to help that, but it didn't. So now they're going to attempt to steer. Because if you're just being pushed around by waves, there is no steering. You're just being pushed by waves. But if they can manage to use a sail, which comes next, and they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore. So now they can manage to get there. And they're not looking at the longevity of the ship. They're not careful that the sail they put up may be shredded by wind. This is a last-ditch effort. This is their effort to get on shore, and the ship is just going to have to wreck. That's all there is to it. They've got to escape from all this. So this is their plan. Now, verse 41. But striking a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground. Now, we want to look at what this means, where two seas met, because one will immediately go to a map and look at Malta, because that's where we are, and see that there aren't two seas meeting there. What's that all about? This comes from a Greek word, dithalason, which means two waters coming in from two directions. That's what it means. And that because either the storm or just the way that this particular harbor was situated, I don't know, or some other things about what's there in the bay, that you have waves coming in from two directions. Okay, and so the description here is where two seas meet. It's not just one, direction that the waves come from. They're coming from two separate directions and meeting there at this harbor. Okay, by striking a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable. That's the front of the ship struck. It's either sand, like a sandbar that was there, or it could be just mud that's there. But they came in with such force that it's stuck and it's not moving. The front of the ship is not moving, which is good, except that the back of the ship is being hammered by waves. And here we see the words, by the violence of the waves. Okay, so let's just begin in verse 41 again. By striking a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. And one can only, I think, interpret this as the fact that they're being hit from both sides, and there's an extreme violence in all this. And okay, the back of the ship's being broken up. This thing is tearing up. Now here comes a scary thing. And the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. That would include Paul, because Paul is one of the prisoners. Okay. Their plan, they can't let prisoners escape. They can't do it. If it's within their ability to stop a prisoner, they will stop a prisoner, even if it means killing him. Even if it means it. They're not going to have an escape. And so it was their plan to do this. Whether they made this known or not, I don't know. But this was their plan. Now, what do you do if you're going to kill Paul? Thank you for telling us how to escape all this. Thank you for warning us in all of these things. Thank you for the fact that you told us this is what's going to happen, but we still got to kill you. Thank you for everything you've done for us. And, still, duty is duty, I suppose. But this is not what happens. This isn't what's going to happen at all. All right, because centurion is going to stop it. So Julius is going to put an end to this. 43, but the centurion, wanting to save Paul, that was his motive. It wasn't to save the other prisoners, but wanting to save Paul, which meant the soldiers meant to kill Paul too. They weren't going to make an exception for him. His soldiers, the centurion's soldiers, were going to kill Paul as well. So the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that those who could swim... Now here comes his plan. All right, he stops this idea of them killing the soldiers. Now he comes up with a very good plan. All right? And commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. And that means any one of the 276 people that are on board, if you can swim, leave now. Okay, you are the first wave, as it were. You're the first crew to go. Anyone who can swim, go ahead and do it. And of course, if you are a Roman soldier or a centurion, and you wanted to keep some of your armor, at least, that's going to be tough to do. Because you've got a sword, you've got the various armor that's on, you've got a helmet. You're going to have to leave some of that behind, or you've got to come up with another solution. Okay, but he tells them, if you can swim, go. Now verse 44, and the rest, some on boards and some on parts of the ship. And so it was that they all escaped safely to land. So the first ones were those that could swim. The second ones were everyone else of get something that you know will float and keep you above water. Take that and now make your way to shore. And it's very possible that the waves are going to help you get there. Maybe. I can't answer that. They may be battered all the way up there and pretty rough. But this is a pretty good plan. This goes down into the category of pretty good plan. This is a good plan because you have those who have something that is buoyant, something that will keep them up, coming after those that are swimming. So if a swimmer gets himself in trouble, someone behind can come in who has something that can keep them up as well. You have boards and you're paddling your way to shore. You can pick somebody else up if you need to. Now, regardless of what happened in all this, it sums it up that they all escaped safely on land. So this is what Paul said. And we want to make note of this. As a matter of fact, we go to verse 24 because this is what the angel told Paul and he tells everybody else. Verse 24, saying, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you." Now we made mention then that the words here, God has granted you all those who sail with you, meaning that Paul was concerned for them and had been praying for them as much as he was for himself. Now, and as we also have made mention, Paul would have known no matter what happens, he's getting to Rome, or no matter what happens. So he could take the position of, good luck for you, but I know I'm going to survive. He's been praying for them all. And as we have seen concerning those soldiers, first off, concerning those sailors who went to the front of the ship pretending to let down more anchors. They were letting down the skiff because they were going to escape. And it was Paul that told the centurion, unless you keep those men on this ship, don't let those men leave. If those men get on that skiff and away, you cannot be saved. All right. He says that specifically to the centurion. That's verse 31. Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. So he is concerned about them. But now let's continue on. Verse 25. Therefore take heart, men, for I believe God, as it will be just as it was told me. He knows it word for word, it will come to pass. Things may look terrible, but what God has told Paul will come to pass. Now, he gives the however. But this is good news. However, we must run aground on a certain island. Okay, so he's telling them where they're going to meet land is an island, and they're going to run aground there, but everyone is going to be spared. That's not saying the ship is going to be spared or the cargo is going to be spared, but every person is going to be spared. And it just so happens when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down the Adriatic, about midnight, the sailors, sensing that they were drawing near some land, they take soundings. Okay, so it is coming to pass. Okay, now we come back to the end of chapter 27. They do escape safely to land. The angel was correct. Paul was right yet again. And he is someone that not only do you want to trust, but it'd be good to stay close by him. He knows things that others cannot know. It'd be good to stick close by to him, because there's something about Paul that nobody else is like. Nobody else is like. Not in this crew anyway. Now, chapter 28, verse 1. Now when they had escaped, they found out that the island was called Malta. All right, a fictitious place? No, Malta is in the Mediterranean. Malta has been there, I guess, since creation. I don't know. But that is where they ended up. And they started out in Crete from this Euroclydon. They've been pushed along for 2 weeks now, 14 days, and have traveled 500 miles. And when they saw the land, when it was day, they did not recognize the land. That's because they didn't know where they were. Is this North Africa? No idea. Is this Sicily? No idea. Spain? No idea. I don't know where we are. I have no idea, except that Paul said it would be a certain island. So, okay, we just take it as that. It must be a certain island. Which one is it? Well, they find out it's Malta. They ended up in Malta. Now notice verse 2. And the natives showed us unusual kindness. Now, the Greek in this says the barbarians. The barbarians showed us unusual kindness. Now, every time we discuss the word barbarian from the Koine Greek, we need to point out that our idea of a barbarian was not the Greek idea of a barbarian. We have our own idea in mind. When I think of barbarian, typically I think of a Viking. He's wearing furs, he has a battle axe, and he's out for blood. Okay. Or I think of someone like the Visigoths who come to sack your city. You know, that's what I usually think of when I think of barbarian. But the term barbarian meant someone who did not speak Greek very well or at all. That's what it meant. You have Greeks and barbarians, those who spoke Greek and those who did not speak Greek. And, okay, let's just take a moment for a second, away from our lesson, that, you know, people in their language has things about it that they have designations for other peoples. Always do. Always do. The word Comanche, I didn't know this till, it's been a little while since I've known this. The Comanches didn't call themselves the Comanches. They didn't call themselves that at all. If you knew what it meant, you'd realize, well, who would call themselves that? Comanche, that's what the Apaches called them. What it literally means in the Apache language is the one who's always my enemy. That's what Comanche means. Now, no people would call themselves the one who's always my enemy. That would be a weird name to give yourself. But, and it's like that in a number of, you have these languages of various peoples that of describing others. People that they don't know who they are, or who they, you know, like with the Comanche against the Apache, I suppose that was the Apache experience with that tribe that lived out in the plains. That would come down every now and then. I guess that was their experience, and so they named them that. Now, with barbarian, yes ma'am?
Who gave the Indians the name Indian?
Yeah, I think that was Columbus. Yeah, now you're the history teacher, but yeah, I think it was Columbus, and because he was trying to make his way to India. He hits a land, this must be India! Hooray, we're here! Without knowing, he had no idea that there were like a couple of continents in the way and no Panama Canal. And so when he makes it here, he ends up in islands first, but when he makes it here, he thought the people that were there were Indians, but he didn't know. He had no idea. Yeah. And anyway, you have natives, and natives just means those who live on this island. All right? And it doesn't mean that they come out with a gigantic cauldron to, you know, that they're a bunch of cannibals and they throw them in the pot. Matter of fact, it's just the opposite. They show, the words are unusual kindness. Unusual kindness, meaning that this was unanticipated. Was unexpected that they would be received so well. Verse 2, the natives showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and made us welcome because of the rain that was falling and because of the cold. And so this could be from, in my figuring, and I'm figuring kind of conservatively, it could be early to mid-October. Now, it may be a little later than that, but this is early to mid-October. And it's cold. And with the Euroclydon, it has been raining. And, of course, it's a lot of wind. And so they shelter them. They make a fire because not only is it raining and cold, but all these men are entirely soaked. They've had to swim to make it to land. So there's not a dry one among them. There's not a dry one there. And so the people here at Malta, the Maltese, this is a shipwreck. These poor men just lost everything but their lives. Okay, and so here they shelter them. They make a fire for them, and they're not making them a fire in the open where they're getting rained on. Obviously, they're under some kind of shelter, and they welcome them. It's raining, it's cold. You guys just survived a shipwreck, which we will see the Maltese would see the hand of some God involved in this. They would see the hand of some God who's involved in sparing their lives. Now, here comes this thing that occurs, okay? And it concerns the viper. And it is a fulfillment of Mark 16:18, which we will read. But first off, verse 3. But when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. So he grabs a bundle of sticks, not knowing there's a viper in the sticks. He has no idea. And, I don't know what snakes are on Malta. I guess I should have looked that up. I don't know what snakes there happen to be on Malta, but evidently there's a poisonous one that's there. He puts it on the fire. Well, now you have a frantic snake who probably was, because it was cold, was rather listless. But now it's, there's all this heat, and it attaches itself to his hand immediately to escape the fire. It fastened on his hand. Now we have the reaction of the natives. So when the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer, whom, though he had escaped the sea, yet justice does not allow to live." Okay? He should have died in the shipwreck. This man must be the worst sort. He managed to escape one thing, but now justice has found him. All right, in the form of this viper. And it would seem like, even to someone not coming to that conclusion of, Paul's having a bad day. This is a bad day. Even if you don't fall in line, let's just say you happen to be among the Maltese, of here he just survived this. Now he gets attacked by this poisonous snake. All right, this is bad, but it is in fact something that they're going to change their mind pretty quick on it. But he shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. Now, let's go to Mark chapter 16. Mark chapter 16. And We will just begin in verse 15. We have the Great Commission, but then we have other words that follow. Okay? So Mark chapter 16, beginning in verse 15, He said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will follow those who believe." Now this would go directly to the book of Acts and through the first century, through the text of the New Testament. They will speak with new tongues. Well, we see that in Acts chapter 2. That happens. They will take up serpents, and if they drink anything deadly, it will by no means hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover. Now, here we have this, they will take up serpents. Well, here is Paul. While Paul doesn't physically pick up the serpent latches on to his hand, and no harm comes to him. There's no harm at all. And the Maltese, they would have seen this happen before of someone who's been bitten, and they know what happens next. Okay? And they're waiting for it. So, he suffers no harm. Verse 6, however, they were expecting that he would swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But after they had looked for a long time and so saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds and said he was a god. All right, here is this switching quickly from one opinion to another opinion. Seeing that nothing, he survived the shipwreck, he survived this deadly snake. Now, he's not a murderer and justice has now found him. He's a god. All right? Now, of course, Paul is actually accustomed to that because that happened to him before in Lystra. And healing a lame man there in Lystra, and they called him Hermes, they called Barnabas Zeus, and they were going to sacrifice to them. And Paul stopped it. Well, and Barnabas stopped it as well. They're out to stop that. Now you have the Maltese. Well, this man is a god. Verse 7. In that region there was an estate of the leading citizen of the island, whose name was Publius, who received us and entertained us courteously for 3 days. So this is unusual kindness, because here's this Publius. He is the leading citizen of Malta, and he receives them, and they are with him for 3 days. And it happened that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and dysentery. Paul went to him and prayed and laid his hands on him and healed him. So when this was done, the rest of those on the island who had diseases also came and were healed. They are happy for this shipwreck. They're happy for it. Now, we're just going to mention again, because it needs to be pointed out. When Paul was in Jerusalem, he's in prison in Jerusalem. He's told not to fear, that he's not going to be dying in Jerusalem. That as he's testified, this goes to chapter 23, verse 11, as he's testified in Jerusalem, so too he will testify in Rome. So that's set. God has that set. The plan is laid out, but it's not strewn with rose petals. Just because he's got it set out doesn't mean it doesn't mean there won't be problems, but it does mean it will occur. It will occur. And it doesn't mean that other things can't happen along the way that are really good. Though there are bad things that occur, yet good things also happen because the bad things occurred. And it's all in the providence of God. Every bit of it. The likelihood is they never would have gone to Malta if there had never been a storm. If it was smooth sailing all the way, they would have just made it to Italy, which is where that ship from Alexandria was going. That's where it was taking the wheat. It's going to Italy. And they never would have made it to Malta at all. And there probably would not have been this trust that had been gained by someone like Julius and no doubt others on that ship. No doubt there were others on that ship that gained a trust in Paul. And now he's in Malta and the Maltese are being healed by him. Verse 10, they also honored us in many ways, and when we departed, they provided such things as were necessary. So they see these shipwrecked people as having brought an extraordinary blessing to them. Extraordinary. That who should wash up on your shore? Paul. Okay, it looks like fate has found him, justice has found him. He's going to die now in front of us since the sea didn't take him. The snake will. Snake doesn't. All right, he must be a god. Now he's healing the sick, and everybody on Malta knows it now.
But he didn't preach the gospel to these people?
Oh, we don't know that. It doesn't. Well, we can know this from the book of Acts. We can know this from the book of Acts. That there are places where Paul went through, and it doesn't say he preached there, but in coming back we see he does preach there. And Italia is one of those places on the first missionary journey. And I'd have to get my map out exactly where it is. It doesn't say they went to Italia, but evidently they did, because when they're coming back, they go to Italia and they get on a ship. They're going back the way they came. First go around, they didn't. And he preaches there. When it mentions coming back, they went through Italia. I think he did. I'm saying that to say this. Acts doesn't tell us everything, because it would be too big a book. It can't. I think that we can assume, all right, what did he do in Lystra? What did he and Barnabas do in Lystra when the people there thought they were gods? What did they do? They say, we're men like you. We're not gods. We're men not like you. And there would have been more of a sermon had that been allowed. But things get wonky. Things go all wrong because of you have evil men coming in and convince them that they're wicked. And but it doesn't say Paul corrected them, but I firmly believe he did. Firmly believe. He's going to let that pass? He's not going to let that pass. Would you let that pass if someone said, you, and truly believed it, they're not joking, you are a goddess? Now, I'm not joking, they truly mean it. Would you let that pass? I wouldn't. That's kind of frightening. I would not let that pass.
They say, the gospel has been preached to the whole known
Yeah.
world.
Yep.
So
That would come under this, yeah. And you have Luke who's there. I think Luke can preach. He certainly can write. Luke can preach. Aristarchus is with them. He can preach. You have, and I don't know who else is with them, but you have a core group that can do the preaching. I think they did while they were there. And if nothing else, it would be only as they were allowed to do something where the circumstances demanded, like thinking that he was a God. Circumstances demand that he had to say something about that. He said, no, I serve a God. I'm not a God, but I serve one. And he's the one that brought us here and has spared us thus far. He's the one who's done it. Okay, now we will continue with chapter 28 next week. Thank you, everybody. And once we are through with the book of Acts, we're not done with the life of Paul. There are some things we do need to cover about him that are some of his writings. We're not going to read all the books that Paul wrote. That we might as well, that's going to be a long, long study. We do those book by book as we do our teaching. But we're going to, once we finish the book of Acts, we will be looking at his writings and discussing things of when certain things could have been written or were likely to have been written or had to have been written, and talk about what he had to say about points of his life and this latter point of his life as well. And so we'll continue next week. Thank you.